On everybody. So we have now covered about what is palliative care, communication, pain management, and ethics. So when we talked about palliative care, um, we told that palliative care is not only for cancer patients but any patients who has serious health-related suffering. So when you look at the palliative care services, many palliative care services will have only cancer care, but some palliative care services will have cancer care and other patients who also are requiring palliative care other than cancer. So actually, do we need to provide palliative care to non-cancer patients? And if you look at WHO statistics, it says the patients who require palliative care will be more for those patients with cardiovascular problems, followed by cancer, and then chronic respiratory diseases, and many other neurological illness, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. So, uh, do they really need palliative care? So, we will hear more from Rajagopal sir about what palliative care can contribute in non-cancer illness. So, as all of you know, Rajagopal sir is the director of WHO Collaborating Center, and he's chairing Palim India. So, welcome, sir, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Sunil, and thank you, everybody. Let me take a look. Yes, Shashikala is already smiling. Many people are wearing masks. Dr. Ravindran, yes, thank you very much. Yeah, let us starting with a smile. Absolutely. We have some important things to talk about. Actually, this is unfair. Sunil is doing something unfair. Just one session for all non-cancer patients. Maybe Sunil, I don't know. I'm sorry, I said you are doing something unfair. We are doing something unfair. Maybe at some point of time, we need to rethink. Sunil, is this, I mean, especially when I see people with dementia, renal failure, etc., COPD, I wonder whether we should be reorganizing our training program to focus more on these people. Well, that's just a thought. In the beginning, when we started my work in Calicut, we used to see, Shashi, you remember, we used to see something like 90% of people with cancer and some people with low backache, some people with some neurological disorders, unusual peripheral vascular disease, etc., about 10% non-cancer. Actually, globally, that was the situation. Things are changing. And now, emphasis on palliative care is for non-cancer conditions is more understandably. And in our unit, Sunil, please correct me if I am wrong. About 54% of our patients have cancer. You can ask Deepak or Shreya to check the recent statistics. It is 50-50 with a little bit of emphasis on cancer, and the others are non-cancer. And I am told that that's also unfair. If all people with non-cancer conditions got palliative care, then the proportion would turn out to be something like 1/4 of cancer and 3/4 of other conditions. Well, we'll just bear this fact in mind. Today, we are not being fair to people with non-cancer conditions. I'll start sharing a screen, and with your permission, I'll start with this question. Maybe, sorry, please don't be angry with me. This is too late to ask this question. Nevertheless, I just want to make sure that everybody is very clear about what we are trying to do. What is the most appropriate answer? Vaishnav, can you give the poll?
Yes, sir.
Vaishnav, how many participants do we have?
We have around 40 to 45 participants, and today we
Okay.
have 33 participants.
33. Okay, we have lot of dropouts. But only two-thirds of people have taken the poll. Others, please put in your votes. This is, I mean, like the fact that some 10 people have not voted is discouraging. Either because they are looking at their WhatsApp, which of course is important, or they are having lunch, which is totally excusable. Slightly discouraging. I'm slightly disappointed that many people who have participated have not taken the poll. To the three people who said prevention and treatment of suffering in terminally ill people, please note, absolutely, I'm glad now I did the poll. Palliative care is not only for the terminally ill. Emphatically, palliative care is not only for the terminally ill. If I have health-related suffering, ladies and gentlemen, even if I am not dying yet, you should give me palliative care. So please take note, those three people who voted for terminally ill patient. It is the second answer would be the most appropriate. Though every single answer here is correct to some extent, the second answer is most appropriate. Prevention and treatment of any serious health-related suffering. Now, this is not only in non-cancer issues, but please note that we have some of these roles which may easily forget. Education of patient, I wish I had changed that. Patient and caregiver education. So very important, particularly in non-cancer conditions. I'll tell you why this becomes even more important. Providing information. Continued assessment, monitoring, and treatment, not of all problems, including side effects. Being an advocate for the patient, to whom? Not only to the society, also for the family. I'll tell you later why. Psychological support, outcome evaluation, all this becomes our role. And how each member's role comes in will depend on what kind of hierarchy we have in the team, what kind of power balance is there, etc., etc. But we will always remember that the most important person in the team is. I wish I had put in a poll for that. But Dr. Ravi, will you unmute and speak? You are saying something.
Patient, it is the patient.
The most, remember that the palliative care or any healthcare is a partnership between the patient and the caregiving team. That means the patient, the family, and you. And the most important person in the team, as Dr. Ravindran emphatically says, is the patient. Now, he said any serious health-related suffering. I wish I had changed this. Let me change it now, right now. Right? Everything happening within a few days, sometimes within hours. Myocardial infarction, a traffic accident, COVID-19. So there is a sudden, quick deterioration. Everything happening within hours or days. So is palliative care necessary? Everybody, somebody please answer chats. Vaishnav, you should keep reading out questions from the chat because I will not be able to monitor the chat box.
Yes, sir.
Meera, I just called out one of the people who have said yes. But no, may I leave Meera alone? Let me ask Angela. And Angela, so it's only for the family, not for the patient, right? Angela, for the patient also. Imagine the person with myocardial infarction in the ICU. In Indian intensive care units, generally, they are not given adequate morphine. Morphine can be a life-saving medicine in somebody with a myocardial infarction. Instead, many people get tramadol, which is not suitable. It increases the blood pressure at least marginally. So, and would that person be anxious? You know that
Yes, sir.
myocardial infarction is associated with a sense of impending death. Even if for the survivors, they are going through that. Does anybody recognize it? Does anybody do anything about it? And COVID-19, pain, breathlessness, delirium, also the fear, the wish, am I dying? Could I just see my child once more? That wish. So this is not certainly, Angela, for the bereavement support, but also for the patient, even if it's only for 1 hour or few days, it's important.
Sir, I have a doubt here, sir. Mostly we tend to think that these people really are not conscious or oriented. So that's why I think most people overlook this part of it.
Angela, which may be
Could that be a
true,
possibility?
which may be true for many people. You get a massive brain injury and you are unconscious, or you have multiple fractures all over the body and it's an agonizing pain and conscious. Both are possibilities, right? Just as in cancer also, you may lose consciousness with a brain massive metastatic brain disease. It's possible, but either way, yeah, let us not take that for granted. Now, Angela, you
Yes, sir.
for the next 5 years, you are unlikely to be called in to help in such a patient. That is true. In Western countries, emergency rooms do call in palliative care physicians for supporting patients and for families, but it is not happening yet in our country.
I always think about this factor, sir. My husband is a forensic surgeon. So whenever I type autopsy reports for him, there's one question which I ask when I see road traffic accidents where there's a lot of trauma. Would he have died immediately? Would he have known about all the injuries which he faces? So that's one thing which always comes to my mind when I go through these, like survival for 2 to 3 hours in an ICU. So this one question just always come to my mind, sir. That's why I asked you right now.
Angela,
Thank you.
I am glad you have come to study palliative care, because if it is somebody who can think of the human being and the suffering, even when reading an autopsy report, you are palliative care material. I hope you will be looking after me when my time comes.
Thank you, sir.
In a condition like cancer, we had a death in our inpatient ward today. This was a patient who had a pancreatic cancer. She was from far away. Initially, she had severe pain. Sunil, on long distance treatment, gave methadone. She had 2 months of good life. Then her pain became worse. And during the last few weeks, our whole team was in agony. I can still remember the tone in Dr. Amrita's voice when she describes that girl's suffering. She died early this morning. So there is generally people who die. It may not be like this. There may be a remission and they may be disease free for several years. Then it may come back. That also may happen. But once it comes back, this kind of quick resolution of the problem, either with recovery, with cure, or with death occurs. Whereas, in a way, this means only this quantum of suffering. Whereas for somebody with a COPD, life is suffering stretched out over a long period. As I say this, of the whatever number of people, 35 people here, there must be at least 2 or 3 who have known of this in your own family. And you would realize how bad the situation is. One of our palliative care doctors, now retired, in Trivandrum, had described this. Repeated trips to ICU. Each one of these down things means a ICU admission, and it goes on till eventually an end comes. Specifically about pain in non-cancer conditions. Pain does occur. And it's not time bound. Pain occurs due to several reasons, not only because of the disease, because of the emaciation, because of the postural changes. And sometimes even back pain can be excruciating. When we choose medicines to treat pain, in non-cancer pain, if it says expected to be long-term, our aim is not only to relieve pain, but also to preserve independence and long-term side effects. You know those people with rheumatoid arthritis who generally are given inadequate pain relief unless they come to palliative care. The vast majority do not come to palliative care. They get very inadequate pain relief. And that means if they are not having pain relief, they are also not independent. They become bedbound. So but more than in cancer, it's true in cancer also, but more than there, we must concentrate on functionality. And once the symptom is treated, we should concentrate on rehabilitation. And long-term planning is more important. For the doctor with COPD who was in and out of ICUs, once we were involved, she has gone into certain decisions. Hereafter, if her condition is worse, she will not go back to ICU. If necessary, she will be treated in a hospital room or in a palliative care center. She has made an advance directive that she is not to be resuscitated. And once the decisions are taken, anyway, for the last 1 year, she has been reasonably well. But if she has a problem, these plans are made. And in her own words, it is such a relief. You don't usually talk about it, and when you don't talk about it, it's anxiety. Uncertainty causes anxiety. Vaishnav, you must interrupt me and tell me about any chat messages that come.
No chat yet, sir.
So, in any non-cancer conditions, these long stretched out processes like COPD or hepatic disease or renal disease, our aim is to reduce hospitalizations because people don't enjoy life in hospital. People, I mean, there are exceptions where people come back to the palliative care center saying, this is the only place where I get some comfort. If Sunil has such a patient in our ward now, for the first time I am knowing peace. She says she doesn't want to go. But for the vast majority, hospitals are not the best places. Reduce that, make advanced care planning. It's a shame that somebody who has been hardly breathing once enough for 3 years finally gets jumped on in the chest and has to undergo a cardiac massage. And sometimes things can happen unexpectedly, and we should plan for that also. What planning? Even having an ambulance number ready, even knowing that any hour they can come to the palliative care center, even in the middle of the night, call an ambulance and come over, because we in our unit do not yet provide 24-hour home care. And if you are using treating non-cancer pain, low backache, opioid should not be used as first line therapy. I'm not, hey, listen, let us make this very clear. I'm not saying that opioid should not be used. I'm only saying that opioids should not be used as first line therapy. Opioids including tramadol, not first line. Think of disease specific treatment, think of paracetamol, think of anything, adjuvants, and use opioids only as a second line measure. If other evidence-based interventions are available, opioids should not be used. Hey, even this is not absolute. How about a peripheral vascular disease? Other evidence-based interventions are not available, and therefore we may have to use opioids as a first-line therapy. These are British Pain Society guidelines. So choosing wisely is an American Society of Anesthesiologists program, who are also talking about chronic pain management and some rules. What I just now said, don't prescribe opioid analgesic as first line therapy. So both the USA and UK are saying the same thing. And don't prescribe opioid analgesic as long-term therapy to treat chronic non-cancer pain until the risks are considered and discussed with the patient. This is something that I did last week with a patient. Very clear understanding, written down. You understand now that this may cause dependence. There is a chance that it may cause addiction. It may. I know addiction is not a problem in cancer pain, but when you may have to use something for 25 years, a certain percentage of people will get addicted. What percentage that is disputed depends on how you define addiction also. It may be as low as 3%, but it's a possibility. And that is for Sunil, you maybe heard about one of our old patients who committed suicide last month after suffering from chronic pain and addiction or dependence for more than 15 years. So you will explain, have an agreement with the family, patient, and if there is a caring family with them also, and only then I will prescribe analgesics as long-term therapy to treat chronic non-cancer pain. This may not apply for a peripheral vascular disease, which may be much shorter time. And if we are using NSAIDs in people with chronic non-cancer pain, again, the point is it's long-term. I wish I had put up a poll there. What's your favorite NSAID? I would make, ladies and gentlemen, a strong recommendation for ibuprofen. Naproxen also, but then for the stomach, probably ibuprofen is safer.
I may interrupt. I work with my husband, who is a rheumatologist. We have been doing for a past from '96 onwards, and we've used indomethacin for our RA patients, and very safe. For years they have been using, and it's given us very good pain relief and very safe also.
So, thank you. Individual NSAIDs may have advantages to treat the pain. Why do we say this? Why do we say ibuprofen? Anybody wants to tell me, is it that it's more effective? No. As Shashikala says, indomethacin could be more effective. Why do I recommend ibuprofen? Any question? Any answer? Either in the chat box or unmute and speak. Anybody?
cardiac safety. Dr. Sheila Rathod says it is due to cardiac safety.
Absolutely, Dr. Sheila. Cardiac toxicity is misunderstood sometimes. That doesn't mean that it will cause myocardial depression. Cardiac toxicity may not be the right word either, Sheila. Adverse events, cardiac and cerebral, may occur. Shashikala, the point is this: with many NSAIDs, the chances of getting a heart attack or a thrombotic stroke increases 5 times. It doesn't happen with anybody. As you say, many of them may be okay, and eventually they may be dying of a heart attack, and we won't even know that we may be contributing to that. So the reason I must also admit, Shashikala, indomethacin was not a prominent study included in the study that I have quoted there. This study was done on the whole population of Denmark, and they found that diclofenac. Remember, everybody who swallows diclofenac also is prothrombotic and increases the chance of a heart attack or thrombotic stroke by as much as 5 times chance. Compared to people who do not take diclofenac, people who take diclofenac have greater chance of infarction and stroke, which may occur over a long time and many years, and nobody may attribute to this. Which is why, and Shashikala, I'm not arguing about indomethacin, because in that study, it was about drugs that are mostly used in Denmark. And indomethacin was not a prominent drug there, so we don't know. But we do know that 400 milligram of ibuprofen, limited to 3 times a day, is safe for the liver, so the heart and the brain in terms of prothrombotic action. And I would also tell you, etoricoxib, the COX-2 selective drug, if at all you use it for the short term. Definitely not a drug for the long term, neither diclofenac nor etoricoxib. Any question about it?
There is another.
Sir, how long can we?
Sorry, question from whom?
Dr. Sheila.
Sheila? Louder,
Sir,
please.
how long can we give?
Sheila.
Sir, how long can we give ibuprofen?
Sheila, you know and I know
Sir,
that NSAIDs may cause gastrotoxicity, renal toxicity, and may inhibit platelet aggregation. Therefore, our aim is to use NSAIDs other than paracetamol. Paracetamol doesn't come into that. NSAIDs other than paracetamol are to be used as short a time as necessary. Having said that, think of the elderly lady with severe rheumatoid arthritis or severe osteoarthritis. She is not a candidate for surgery. She can hardly move. You know what happens to these people? They don't respond usually well to opioids because the pain is to a large extent moment related. We can either give paracetamol or another NSAIDs. There's no choice very often. Unless disease-specific anti-rheumatoid treatment is effective, they have no chance. You know these people. They are in your homes. They are all around in the community. So what happens to them? They lie there. They have miserable lives. They get contractures. They get pressure sores and die a horrible death. So Sheila, ordinarily NSAIDs are given for as brief a time as possible, but there are exceptional situations where it's a question of balancing the risk and benefit. That woman there with contractures and pressure sores is having a life that is worse than death. I would give her long-term NSAIDs. Sorry that I have not given a straight, simple answer, but generally the answer is for as short as possible.
Okay, sir.
So though I started by saying that palliative care is not only for the dying, I think we will also say a few words about dying in old age. Frailty of old age is grouped as one disease in international classification of diseases. So if you do not have a particular disease, you gradually become frail in the elder as an elder. Then dying in old age, it's a long process. It may not be quick at all. And repeatedly, as I showed in the curve earlier, there are difficult decisions all across the way, which are negotiated with great difficulty. Many things happen to people in that time. One is the long period, but also you don't know. You have no idea. And sometimes people think, okay, he's close to death, and they go on for another 7 years. And gradually, one organ after another gets diseased. But the worst thing is the losses they go through. Independence. Something that at the age of 73 I am enjoying is my independence. But if I am limited in my activities, if I am limited in my ability to climb these stairs, remember how much my life contracts? I enjoy getting up to the roof and walking on the rooftop, on the terrace. In these COVID days, that's something that I do for an hour or an hour and a half every day. I do all my phone calls walking. And all of a sudden, what change happens to my life if I am unable to climb those stairs? But something that's even worse. And ladies and gentlemen, think about this, about the elders in your own home. How much control does your grandmother have over her own life or grandfather? They were in control of their lives at one time. All of a sudden, decisions are taken away from them. Sometimes you take decisions to take them to the hospital without even telling them. Oh, Amma, you didn't know? We are going to hospital today. And things happen in home. Decisions are taken. Decisions are taken about changing the bank account and the man doesn't know. Decisions are taken about what to, some decisions in the kitchen, and the woman who was ruling the kitchen is not involved, or the man. Please remember, this reduces the meaning of life for them. If you have an elderly person in your own home, think of giving them more control over their own lives. Involve them in the decision-making process. And often their life is with a heavy burden of symptoms. And the caregiving needs keep increasing. You have your work to do. You have engaged a maid. And then you work from morning to evening. And this person's care needs keep on increasing. So these are all realities. It's a reality for your loved ones, and it's a reality for each one of us. As maybe I said on another day, only 10% of us die a sudden death. 90% of us will have to go through this. Those from Kerala would know of the 104-year-old bishop who died last night, Bishop Mark Chrysostom, very popular person, such a great sense of humor. I remember that I didn't know him personally, but I read about it. When he was 98, there was a birthday celebration. Somebody organized a meeting. So a lot of people came, politicians, ministers, etc. Everybody said about, I wish him a long life, at least another 50 years, etc., etc. And most of these politicians will leave immediately after their speech. So when Bishop Mark Chrysostom stood up to give his response, he said something like, all of them can make their wishes and leave. If I live long, I am the one to suffer. And that was so important, you see. Long life is not necessarily a blessing. There comes a time when the person even loses the ability to commit suicide and life goes on. The dying process often happens to whatever the disease originally they have. It may be due to a heart failure or a stroke or a myocardial infarction or horrible thing, progressive uh, breathing capacity, loss of breathing capacity, and the worst things like dementia or Parkinson's or ALS, just a frailty syndrome, senile cachexia or debility, and of course cancer. These are the commonest groups. I don't know what you consider the worst among these. Personally, for me, I wouldn't pray that I don't get cancer. As Dr. Richard Smith, the former editor of the British Medical Journal, said, cancer is not a bad way of dying when you compare it with something like dementia or Parkinson's. Horrendous things. But those things are horrendous, particularly because we do not support them. The healthcare system doesn't support them. The healthcare system doesn't educate the families. To take a few conditions independently, end-stage cardiac disease means poor exercise tolerance. Usually it's a cardiologist alone treating the person with no palliative care there. We also don't see people with cardiac disease. And to the last, even when they have ejection fraction of 15% and cannot even walk to the toilet, they have frequent hospitalization. About 24 different medicines, including statins, and very often they have a pacemaker put in. Unfortunately, the trajectory of illness is with dips in quality of life like this and a slowly progressive death. If their treatment can be combined with palliative care along with cardiology treatment, the difference can be amazing. Dementia, as I said, is horrendous. Incontinent of bowel and bladder, very few words, so they are unable to communicate. Keep getting admitted to hospital again and again, mostly in intensive care unit. Each one of them worsens the dementia and not taking nutrition. So, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, sir, I would like to interrupt, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, I recently lost my grandfather in February due to dementia, but we never admitted him in not one single hospital admission, sir. We managed it at home, sir, with palliative care, sir.
I have respect for you for doing this. Is that Sheila?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sheila, what percentage of dementia, people with dementia have that privilege, do you think? Make a guess.
Less than, sir?
Less than?
Hardly 1%, sir.
Yeah,
Less
maybe.
Than 1, maybe.
Yeah, you are an exceptional person, Sheila. You could understand your grandparents. Most people, it's not because they don't love them. Because they love them, they take them to hospitals. So neurologist treating him. All sorts of medicines and intensive care. So
Right.
if there is this person who has been in and out of hospitals a lot, you look at the last but one line, they cannot swallow, not taking enough nutrition or taking in only a little bit, an ounce of fluid at a time, hardly any food. What would you do? How would you handle that? Sheila, did that happen with your grandparents?
Yes, sir. It happens, sir.
What did you do, Sheila?
So we used to just give him sips of water, sir.
Sorry. Everybody, please listen to that advice.
We used to just give him sips of water. We made him comfortable, pain-free. We used to give him, he was pain-free with Ultracet and paracetamol. And he had hiccups problem. So we used to give him Perinom. His hiccups used to settle with Perinom and Antacid. And that's all. As days passed on, I stopped all his medicines, sir. I stopped his statins, his aspirin and all. I just kept him on his BP tablet. No vitamin tablets. Last 1 week, I had stopped all his medicines. And I prepared my family that slowly he will pass away. Don't worry. We have to accept the fact. I mean.
Sheila, I am very glad that you did that. Except that in the last week, I would not withdraw the pain medication.
No, sir.
I would reduce the frequency.
Ultracet was there, sir.
Okay, okay. Thank you. That's the thing to do. Yes, totally agree. That's what we should be doing. Many of you are thinking, wouldn't you put in a nasogastric tube?
I told them for nasogastric tube, but my family refused, sir.
I'm trying to find the people's names, I can't see. But anybody who has not spoken so far, what do you think about an nasogastric tube for this person who is no longer consuming enough fluids or food? Ladies and gentlemen, a nasogastric tube will not achieve any purpose because it may achieve nutrition briefly, but in a person with dementia, that particularly makes them vulnerable to aspiration. Around the nasogastric tube, the cricopharyngeal sphincter will not be, esophagogastric sphincter will not be competent, and the incompetence will cause regurgitation. And anyway, do you think this person, this man or woman, will tolerate a nasogastric tube? He will pull it out. So what will you do? You will tie them up.
Dr.
And
Shashidharan want to speak?
Shashi? Shashi, please speak up. Unmute and speak.
He has raised his hands, but
May not, maybe earlier, and he must have forgotten to lower the. Shashi, so everybody, international, the American Geriatric Society has made guidelines clearly stating that nasogastric intubation or even gastrostomy should not be done. Whatever they can take, let them take. Because if you start feeding them, to prevent pulling out the tube, you are forced to tie them up, and that's the most cruel thing you can do. Shashi, did you want to say something? No. I'm sorry, this is a hard decision. Majority of people will want to put in a tube. Even if they have taken an earlier decision, they cannot bear it. It's out of love. They cannot bear to see the person starving. And in pulmonary disease, there's disabling dyspnea, decreased functional ability, increased fatigue, increased visits to emergency department and intensive care unit, hypoxemia at rest, on supplemental oxygen. How do you manage this person? If oxygen relieves the breathlessness, it should be given. But very often in COPD, it does not. If it is not helping with the breathlessness, don't. In COVID-19, you have to check the oxygen saturation because you have to treat it. In a COPD, it may become, in advanced COPD, it may become irrelevant. You are not treating the oximeter, you are treating the person. What medicine can you give for treating respiratory, the dyspnea in advanced COPD?
Morphine, sir.
Yes, morphine is again international recommendation. Was that Sheila?
Yes, sir.
Sheila, if you have this 85-year-old person with breathlessness, what dose will you give? Morphine starting dose.
4 mg, sir. 4 mg 3 times a day.
Actually, Sheila, I started by giving almost the same, like 5 milligrams 4 times a day. And Sunil came and has advised me not to do that. Sunil was looking at the recommendations and advised me to start with even lower. We now would go with 2.5 milligram if renal function is normal 4 times a day, or if it's a very elderly person or a poor renal function, 3 times a day would be the starting dose.
Okay, sir.
And if it is a kidney disease, remember that methadone and fentanyl are the safer opioids. If you put them on morphine, even low dose is okay. If you don't have methadone or if cannot be titrated on fentanyl, morphine will be okay. But remember, if they are undergoing dialysis, every dialysis on the table, they will have severe. And death in renal failure. How am I doing for time? Okay, I'm okay. My mother-in-law died at the age of 88 of chronic renal failure. She was a diabetic for about 35 years and eventually succumbed to renal failure. Our team looked after her. There was hardly any doctor involved. She had very little symptoms. It was our nursing team who gave such beautiful service that I am even now very grateful to them. There are two ways in which people may have come to the end of life. One is the majority, like happened to my mother-in-law. She became gradually sleepy, lethargic, obtended, and very slowly over a couple of weeks slipped into a coma. And then she died. And in a way, this death in renal failure can be one of the best ways of dying. Very little suffering. But unfortunately, some people with renal failure may not die in this way. They'll get restless, confused, tremors, hallucinations, delirium, convulsions, all problems. So remember that all renal failure is not necessarily a good death. Some will have to be treated aggressively. And here, what do? You just treat like any other disease. You stop worrying too much about the renal function. What's important is comfort. And once we know that, we may treat the confusion with a low dose psychotropic drug, not benzodiazepine, so that you prevent hallucinations and agitation. And if there are convulsions, you treat it prophylactically. I mean, as soon as it appears, you start treating it and then give prophylactic anticonvulsants. So these are some important points to remember. We have we started by saying what palliative care is. Remember, at least for 3 people, that was a review to say that it is prevention and management of serious health-related suffering. And we went on to the how many non-cancer conditions are different from cancer in the way the suffering happens. I will now request you to do a group work. We do have a few minutes more. This group work is only 5 minutes. Vaishnav is going to break you into 5 groups. Each group, therefore, will have something like 7 or 8 people, I suppose. I would request you now to list over 5 minutes only any lessons learned today. In every group, you have to find a leader to lead you. Somebody has to take notes. And at the end of the 5 minutes, when Vaishnav brings us back, we will, each group leader will share 1 point each to start with. Okay, Vaishnav? Group work?
So
Ah.
group one, what we learned was like the different types of pain which require palliative care other than about cancer. The term palliative care always brings back to us only cancer related pain. So we require pain management for other things also. And one of the points which we all noted was in demented patients, we do not have to insert a nasogastric tube and we have to continue pain management till the end. That was one point which everybody noted in the group, and also care of others for the cardiac events at the later stage of life and respiratory symptoms. One thing which everybody noted was the use of ibuprofen. Ibuprofen, which is a commonly available drug and which is not very expensive, which can be used to relieve pain at doses which are safe also, and the effect of the diclofenac, problems associated with diclofenac. These were the things which everyone has noted also. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Vaishnav, somehow my screen sharing has been disabled.
I will share.
Okay, second group. I'm sorry, I meant to write it all down because my screen sharing has been disabled. I am unable to project it. That's okay. Sunil, can I request you to just note these learning points down? Second group.
You can share now,
Sir,
sir.
Okay, no time now, Vaishnav. Second group.
Sir, we learned that the length of life doesn't matter. What matters is the quality of life.
Wait a minute. Who said that?
So Sheila, sir.
I'm not sure that I'll take that as a rule. For some people, length of life does matter. It's up to the person. But quality of life matters, whether life is short or long. For some people, length of life doesn't matter. Others cling on to life. And even when with very poor quality of life, they may say, save me. So that is the individual's choice. Thank you. Next.
Sir, and Dr. Bipin feels that peaceful death is always memorable. So, and death is a must. We all are going to die. So acceptance may take some time, but then we have to keep counseling. And Dr. Sashikala feels that even in acute cases like MI and all, she learned that palliative care is very important, which earlier we were not aware that acute cases also may need palliative care. And she's happy that rheumatoid arthritis has been included in palliative care because she feels if a poll would have been taken among her friends, all would have opted for option number 3. That palliative care is only for serious illness.
Yeah, I mean,
And
that is all of us, including me, before I came to palliative care, would have said the same. Yes, and sorry, one more.
so one more is Dr. Gajanan said no one plans for death. So he feels we have to plan. We all plan for life, but we don't plan for our deaths. So like we have to start.
Does that sound very morbid to others? Planning for death, oh God.
Like once you diagnose with a terminal illness.
No, even otherwise, nowadays, most people, I mean, most countries, the Western countries, you advocate making advanced directives early. You never know what's going to happen to you next year, and you may be too busy then. And Vaishnav, will you please make a note of this? If I am doing end-of-life care for this group, please send me a reminder to show the Nagarjuna video.
Sure.
Because here you said, I think it was Bipin who said, a peaceful death can be memorable. Indeed, I was talking to one of my colleagues day before yesterday. She mentioned that it was her father's death anniversary. I said, I hear that the anniversary is a very difficult day. She said, it's a mixed thing. We, within the family, talked about the good times that we have had together. If it is a painful, miserable death, the good memories cannot surface. Thank you for the important point. Anything else?
No, that's it from my group, sir.
Other groups? Is that all? Everybody's response coming?
No, sir.
It's 5. Yes.
We all discussed and said that for a good quality of life during the end stage, whatever the disease might be, for the patient to remain at home, to be able to interact, to be part of this decision making, as well as to control, to a certain extent, is so important and vital. And also to give morphine in case of dyspnea, like that was a new concept for us. And also not to involve much of the invasive procedures, but to make them comfortable, especially like intubation or gastrostomy or a Ryle's tube. And also to think of giving palliative care to all patients, even if it's just for a few hours.
Thank you.
Make it meaningful.
Thank you. So I don't have to summarize today between the groups. You have summarized that session. Thank you very much. Vaishnav, you will be sending my presentation to everybody in case anybody wants to review. Sunil, I'm sorry that exceeded time by 6 minutes. Back to you for the case presentation.
Are there any group who didn't give feedback about their group's discussion?
Sir, actually, group 4.
Yeah.
Group 4.
Group 4, please.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Sir, actually, in our group, most of us have shared the personal experiences also. In that, actually, some of us felt that where we should keep the line, like as you said, towards the end, it's better to be at home, but from the family point of view, they will feel that whatever we should do, means we should try to recover them, or whatever we can do for them, we should do. That aspect, the conflict between these two ideologies might end in the negative, like he might be ending his life in the hospital, and that's a saddest thing. That's one thing we had the discussion. And
Vaishnav, please note down this point that Dr. Harsha mentioned, and we will come back to that when we have the session on end of life care. Thank you, Harsha.
Sir,
was there any other point? Yes.
Sir, one more. Yeah. Sir, actually, about the towards the end, if we want, we have to end, means like no need of using the nasogastric tube and all those were there. And in terminally ill patients, autonomy is the prime importance we should give to autonomy itself. Dr. Ravindra had the view, sir had told about that also. Molly ma'am, Anisha ma'am, and Chetan ma'am, Sunil, Shanti ma'am were all in our discussion. Sorry if I had missed someone. Sunil sir was also there with us.
Thank you, Harsha.
Oh. Okay. So I think we will move on to a patient story. Okay, Dr. Shashikala will be presenting. Yes. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Dr. Shashikala Venugopal. I actually work with my husband, who is a rheumatologist. We have rheumatology centers in both Coimbatore and Cochin, and we've been practicing rheumatology from '96 onwards. And as you know, for us, daily, all our patients present with pain, and they live with us. Like we have lived all. Their life journey always goes with us. So since pain and the chronicity of the disease is what I've been seeing, but the concept of palliative care is in these conditions I'm just learning now. But today I wish to present a story of another lady who is not our patient, and I've been a part of her support group, and I thought her story will be appropriate for today's discussion. She's a 53-year-old lady who has got diabetes, hypertension, and because of her diabetes, she's gone in for renal failure and she's on hemodialysis. She had 3 episodes of MI and stenting was done, And because of diabetic retinopathy, she lost vision in both the right eye, and she has very minimal vision in her left eye, and she's got chronic anemia and hypothyroidism. Next slide. So this 53-year-old lady is undergoing hemodialysis 4 times a week. And like I told, she has a loss of vision in the right eye and limited vision in her left eye. Recent onset of pain in both the knees, especially while climbing stairs. But this gets relieved with rest and paracetamol if necessary. And she's also on treatment for diabetes, for hypertension, and coronary artery disease. Next slide, please. So she developed diabetes and hypertension at around the age of 32 years, and she has been on regular treatment since then. So subsequently, she developed stage 4 diabetic nephropathy 6 years ago, and she's been on hemodialysis for 3 to 4 times a week since then. She had 3 episodes of MI between 2018 and 19, and she was on ventilator during all these episodes. And after stenting in 2019, she's stable with medications. Then 2 years ago, she developed retinal bleeding in both eyes. They did a surgery, and she has moderate vision in one eye and almost no vision in her right eye. And now her mobility is restricted because of pain in both knees, especially while climbing stairs. Next slide. And I saw her on 26th, and that night she was having pallor, and her BP was 140/90 with mild pedal edema and crepitus in both the knees. And investigations were done on 3rd of April. So she gets it done once a month when she goes for her dialysis, and these were the results. Like as you see, the urea, the creatinine are all still high, and she's got high potassium and high phosphorus also. Next slide, sir. So she is on a big list of medicines for diabetes, for hypertension, for anemia. I think for want of time, we will just skip this, sir.
Yes.
Next slide, sir. For cardiac issues, for others. The point is, many of the medicines, all the cardiac medicines are quite nominal cost, but most of the diabetic medicines and the medicines for her, for reducing phosphates, all of them are quite expensive. So this is what I wanted to say by listing them now, list of medicines here. So next slide, sir. And her family history is a long one. Then she is from an upper middle class family. They're quite well off initially, and she was the 5th child with a family of 5 sons and 2 daughters. And she did her graduation. She was working in a college. She's an English literature graduate. She got married at the age of 28, and then at the age of 32, she developed diabetes and hypertension. All her siblings and her parents, they either had or have diabetes. At around the time when she got diabetes, her mother underwent bilateral knee amputation due to diabetes, and subsequently she had a heart attack and she died. And her father was also a diabetic and a hypertensive, and he also died due to cerebral hemorrhage. She lost her elder brother due to heart attack soon after this, and also a 3rd brother also she lost. And her 2nd brother also underwent amputation of both legs because of diabetes, and he passed away early this January. And her younger brother, who also underwent both below knee amputations, he is okay. And actually, through my Innovate Club, we were able to source a high-end motorized wheelchair for him 2 months ago, and actually that's greatly improved his mobility and their morale. Next slide, sir. And her younger sister, she also has chronic renal failure due to diabetes, and she has been on dialysis for the past 2 years. Her husband is a very nice man. He had a good job in Tamil Nadu, but because of all the family problems, he had to relocate to Cochin. And so his job is not very proper now. So how initially she used to take treatment in GH, but because of the multiple complications, she has shifted her treatment to a private hospital where all the specialists are available. And she has taken a house on rent near the hospital. Her husband does car brokering and some all and sundry jobs, and he drops her and picks her up for the dialysis. And the procedure itself, she says, takes a long time because she develops breathlessness midway, so they stop and then they resume it. So monthly expenses for dialysis and medicines alone amount to about 35 to 38,000 rupees. So her college mates have formed a group and they provide financial assistance regularly. Actually, this is where I come. Our Innovate Club, we used to provide monthly allotment of 3,000 rupees for her. And actually, I didn't know much about her, but because I wanted to analyze her case, I spoke to her and I met her, I spoke to her, and I was able to know her story. So only through these assistance, all her medical expenses are met. And the meager income of her husband is usually not enough for meeting the rent and food, but she manages with whatever is available. Next slide, sir. So due to her multiple complications, she's not suited for renal transplantation. She's aware of her prognosis and very well informed about all the aspects of her condition. And what actually struck me during my conversation was her positivity and optimism. And her source of strength is her husband, who's very supportive. He understands her, he talks to her very well, takes loving care of her. And the group of college mates are always ready to help her with rescue and with resources and solace. So she's only concerned about her husband and the uncertainty of the future. I like what she said. I know that there is nothing I can do about it, so I take it as it comes, one day at a time and 1 minute every day. This is what I learned. This is what she told me at the end of our conversation. Next slide, sir. So this patient is actually a prototype of patients with chronic non-malignant conditions which require lifelong medical interventions. Next slide. Actually, this story is an example of what Rajagopal sir presented to us in the first class, the error of commission. This family was actually very well, quite well off. They had property and all that. And during the course of all these medical issues, they sold all their properties and like they don't have any savings or any support now. And she's meeting only through these philanthropic contributions. Again, in the current pandemic scenario, I don't know how long she is going to get. So this, I thought I could highlight this point. Next slide, sir. So I wanted to know what we can do to help this patient. Will the services of a palliative care team, will it help her? And also in the long term, how do we integrate the principles of palliative care in specialties dealing with the non-malignant condition, especially in the field of rheumatology? And I understood that a lot of palliative care principles are now form a part of the curriculum in undergraduate level. But what do we do to sensitize the practicing professionals who are managing these conditions?
Ma'am, you are muted, ma'am.
I thought, what about including palliative principles in their regular conferences and CMA programs? Because when I started doing this course, my husband himself said, "Oh, so palliative care means dealing with end-of-life issues." So he did not. So that is the level of understanding. So this is what I thought I can learn from the book discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sasigala. At least I think you will be able to sensitize one doctor.
Yes, and actually, this time Pallium India's newsletter, I just saw that Pallium India has been a part of the guideline principles. I mean, I think the operating principle guidelines. I saw that there is some thing that is going on. I think Rajagopal sir will be able to enlighten us about that also. Whatever I asked in the discussion point is already taking place. Is what I read in the Pallium India newsletter that I just received today.
Okay, so I would like to ask the participants to comment on these questions. Will this patient be benefited by palliative care services?
Yes, sir, she will be benefited, sir, definitely.
Can you elaborate what can we do? What all we can do for this patient?
We can take care of her knee pain and her breathlessness, sir.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else can be done from a palliative care point of view?
So we can do pill. We can reduce the number of pills, sir. We can have a discussion with all the specialists that which is actually necessary just to keep her on those medicines and which are not necessary. Minimize her pill by considering all the specialists by having a talk with the specialist.
some of the insulin that she's using is actually around 2,000 or 2,500 rupees. Most of those medicines are so expensive. I was really shocked when I was calculating the
But then
actual cost.
we can start her on simple Actrapid thrice a day. That also will work. No, that's cheap.
I don't know why why they are giving so much. But
Okay. Anybody else has any idea how to provide or interventions? What other interventions can be done from palliative care? Dr. Chetan says he can give moral support by listening to her patient. Yes.
till I took up this case for discussion, no, she used to be just one of the persons who's benefited from our club. So every month I used to send the money and I'll call her and ask her did she receive it, and she said yes. So I did not know that she is undergoing she has so much of problem, because some member brings us the project and we will sanction it. So only when I listened to the story, now I was able to sensitize the whole all our members, to that. Then now after this, whenever we get a patient for whom we are supporting, I talk to them. I also talk to them and give them sort of moral support. So that's one thing that positive influence of this course.
Okay, that's very. What else can be done? So you have talked regarding physical symptom control, psychological support, and we know this patient, as you told, financially supported by somebody else. So maybe we have to look for some support from somebody else. And it is also important to find out her concerns. What are her concerns? And have you ever asked what is the quality of life that she is experiencing, or what is the quality of life she is having as of now?
That was very surprising. I told you, she's actually very positive. She's quite happy, because she says, I understand what my limitations are. So all her life is around going to the hospital 4 days a week. She takes about 3 to 4 hours or more than 5 hours sometimes for her dialysis. So her life is going to the hospital for dialysis, coming back, and then she has a lot of restrictions about what she should eat and cooking also. So she manages that. She just takes it as she doesn't think much. Only thing that is worrying her is what will happen to her husband. How long can this go on? But that also she says there's no point, because I don't know. I can't help it anyway. So I'm just living life for the moment. So actually, this lady is very positive. I don't know. Maybe if you sit and talk with her more, maybe she'll come out with more of concerns. But overall, whenever I call her over these 2 years, she's always like this, very cheerful, which is a lesson for all of us, actually.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Do you think advanced care plan need to be made for this patient?
So thank you, Sunil. Shashikala, thank you for the story. So if I have respect for that lady, her strength of character, her positive outlook. So I will say that. I will tell her, Miss So and so, I see that you are a strong person and an optimistic person, and I wish I will have your strength or half your strength when my time comes. When we have built a relationship, because saying something positive about the person brings us closer. It should not be a lie. I won't say that, oh, you are such and such, if I do not believe in it. I truly believe that she is a strong person with positive attitude, and I will acknowledge that. Remember that itself brings us closer. And once we are close enough, I may say, in response to Sunil's question, so and so, I don't know her name. Let us call her Sujata. Sujata, with your strengths and with your love from your husband and your classmates, I do hope you have a good quality of life for a long period of time. But because you have all these problems, while we are hoping for the best, it may be also good to make some plans for anything bad. Then we can be, some anxieties you are hiding inside will be relieved. For example, if you get a breathlessness on nights, do you know what to do? Do you know where to go? Do you know what number to call for an ambulance, etc.? Okay. That is, if you are not well enough to walk to the car and come, what would you do? I hope that doesn't happen. But if that happens, we need to be ready. And then I may bring up resuscitation if she is ready to talk. Most probably, at this point, she may bring out things that she is hiding. Shashikala, she is very positive. But even very positive people have true anxieties. I think we need to help her to bring them out when we are comfortable, when we have a relationship. That may make her sad, but it will be a good investment for the future. I would bring up the question, and someday she may say, it's okay if I die. And whenever she says I die or death or something, I'll say, you brought up the word die. Is that often in your thoughts? And she may say, yes, it's always. It can happen. Something will come. And then again, that will be an opportunity to find out the real anxieties. Sunil?
Regarding the how to integrate the principles in specialties, like if we're able to throw a guide, like how do we?
Shashikala, this is difficult, but it is being done. I can assure you it's being done. You mentioned the operational guidelines from our newsletter.
Yes,
it's
sir.
happening through the whole of primary care system, but tertiary care is harder. Specialists are less likely to listen to palliative care than a primary care doctor. It's not going to be easy, but that's not a reason for us not to try. Shashikala, why not start with your own practice?
Yes, sir. I've already started.
We have it, make it a proper plan, have an action plan after discussion with your husband. It will take time, but document everything and give visibility to what you are doing. See how much a better pain relief your people have, and let us give visibility to it. When you demonstrate this, and when your success in integration of palliative care to your rheumatology practice appears in some international journal of rheumatology, that will be the beginning.
Yes.
Maybe her nephrologist is willing to listen, and maybe some questions can be raised. Should she really have that atorvastatin? And the nephrologist may say, no, I didn't start that, the cardiologist did. And maybe some discussions can happen. So don't expect a quick change from super specialists who may not be so, all of them may not be so open to palliative care as much as primary care doctors, as much as Shashikala is.
Actually, I didn't realize that I was all along doing palliative care aspect in my clinic, because I used to think my husband is a specialist, so I used to be helping out, but I used to talk to the patients. And over the years, they become so much of friends. Some of them, they call me by name only, because they say what all they cannot ask the doctor himself, they ask me. So I used to think I'm not doing anything, but after this course, I think I've actually been doing a lot of things to my patients. So I think, like you said, I'll bring it in a more structured format and see what difference it makes actually.
Very good.
So another question was, can inclusion of palliative care as a topic in the regular conference and CME's program will help in sensitizing the professionals who are currently involved in the management of other diseases?
Sunil,
Yes, sir.
what's your own answer to this from your how many years? 15 years of palliative care experience?
uh, so um, uh, there are a few people in every specialty who would like to include palliative care into their specialty, but there will be strong opposition from others also. So, but they will take a step, but we have to follow up it very closely, and then only we can achieve something. Uh, but it is very difficult even to include palliative care as a topic in CMEs or conference. But I think nowadays we are getting more invitation for presenting palliative care.
So, say, let us look on the positive. There is a strong group of neurologists who are talking about palliative care and doing palliative care workshops for neurologists. Would you believe it? Between 3 workshops, more than 100 neurologists in the country have attended 3-day workshops in palliative care. It's a beginning. In Trivandrum Medical College, we are doing a project with the neurology department to integrate palliative care into their stroke care. We are doing a project with Department of Surgery in one unit to integrate palliative care into routine surgical practice.
Wow.
Some things are happening, but as Sunil says, we have made no inroads at all into cardiology. At least 2 senior pulmonologists are now practicing palliative care and pioneering palliative care. The change will be slow, but you have to keep making it happen. Shashi, if you go to the organizers of CME programs and they say, hey, let us start palliative care, the response may not be initially very good. But if you find some cardiologist who has an interest in palliative care and work through that person, you are more likely to succeed in our experience. Wherever we are here, it's totally about some positive point. Remember that it took 40 years to get to where we are. Things take time, but now I believe we are on a steep part of the curve. MBBS students already have it in the curriculum. What a change.
My son has just finished his final year MBBS, so he had a topic on palliative care. So that's why I said undergraduate level, it is the sensitization is taking place.
Very good. Sunil, I fear we have exceeded time.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for the.
We understand that palliative care is very much needed for non-cancer patients who also.
Sunil, shall we
really,
stop the share?
Yes, sir.
Screen share.
Who also suffer from many symptoms that the cancer patients also suffer. And I see that many of the symptoms are common both in cancer patients as well as non-cancer patients. And even sometimes non-cancer patients suffer more compared to cancer patients. So there is all the reason that we should not hesitate to provide palliative care for non-cancer patients. As I told you earlier, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, neurological illness, chronic kidney diseases, neurological illnesses, and there are many other types of non-cancer diseases which require palliative care. It is important for us to sensitize our fellow professionals to integrate the principles of palliative care into their own specialty. It will take time, but we will continue to do our work, and they will gradually integrate these principles into their practice. So thank you, sir, for enlightening us with the importance of palliative care in non-cancer illness. And thank you, Dr. Sasigala, for presenting a beautiful patient story, which was very apt for this situation. And thank you all for your active participation. Thank you.
Feedback,
So,
feedback.
yeah, please do this feedback which is shared in the chat box. And so over to Vaishnav.
Thank you, Rajagopal sir. Thank you, Sunil sir. Thank you all. See you in next session. Thank you.